is the United States getting humiliated in two of the kinds of conflicts that aren't, outside of the mission, aren't, strange, neocon fantasies that nobody's really committed to. The United States military is failing to defend the sea lanes in Yemen and is failing to provide basic military equipment.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Rory, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics is Robert Morris. And should I point out, I prefer to use the term Rob Morris these days, because as you pointed out, there's a bad Robert Morris running around.
Yeah, it's one of the great virtues of my life, up until the point where I started trying to be an online political pundit, is that my name is absolutely ungoogleable. Across the United States and the United Kingdom, there are a horde of Robert Morrises. And I've been aware of the recently famous Robert Morris for years, because he was the guy who came up when you Googled Robert Morris. He has now apparently lost his ministry.
He's a very bad man, it would seem.
Yeah, for child molestation or something along those lines.
Doesn't get much more serious than that.
I'll confess I haven't looked into it in
you don't
great
want to
detail.
find out the grisly details. But we are with the good Robert Morris.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, Rob Morris. I don't know, on the books I think I usually put Rob Morris. I'm not sure. I am,
you will
as
from
always,
now on.
Yeah. I am, as always, inconsistent and bad at branding. So...
Would you like to talk about something else that's bad?
Oh, I don't know about something else that's bad.
Oh.
I thought it would be worth talking about. I briefly dived into New York politics. I live in New York City. I think living in New York gives me a lot of opportunities to participate in politics that I don't often take. It was quite interesting. I guess this will be a full week back once we upload this. Was this like an indoor sort of
fundraiser thing, or was this out in the streets with a megaphone? What sort of form did it take?
Well, so this was a political rally. This was not a protest, as people keep describing it, keep assuming it is. And I know it was a political rally in favor of an embattled New York politician named Jamal Bowman. It's a very interesting, what drew me to it, what made me decide to actually get involved to the extent of showing up for something, was the fact that it had a very strong foreign policy element. Jamal Bowman is famous as, is he the only male member of the squad? That can't be right. But this sort of group of Democrats in the House of Representatives that are seen as, predominantly of color, but also, more importantly, I would say, predominantly left-leaning, sort of renewing the New Deal.
An American left. He's probably considered centered in a lot of other countries, but for America, they're radicals.
For sure. And I got to say, among the squad, Jamal Bowman is probably the one that I'm least interested in as a political figure. He does seem like a bit of a... Well, I mean, he's most famous for pulling a fire alarm during congressional deliberations. Or I'm not sure if that was...
Is that allowed?
No, I don't. Honestly, I don't know too much about it, and I think...
Is that the new filibustering? Is if it's going not your way, you just hit the fire alarm?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's very strongly illegal, and would have gotten him in very real trouble if he wasn't a representative. So this is not a guy that I was, really excited to go to bat for until IPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, a very famous lobby in the United States, decided to make this the most expensive primary challenge in United States history.
Wow.
So, like I said, Jamal Bowman, I mean, it's good to have more progressive voices and more black men in Congress, but I can't say that I would really be that interested in going to bat for him. But his proposed replacement is nominally a Democrat, but is mostly his important distinguishing factors are that he is a adamant, feverish supporter of Israel.
Is this Elliot Engel?
No. That you're thinking of a different race that was interesting a year or so back. Bowen who unseated Engel? I think so. No, this is a new guy who's really quite vile, frankly. Enthusiastic supporter of genocide and also is a supporter of tax cuts. So this guy's, you have this a lot in New York. Democrats who are not really Democrats. It's just New York is still just barely a one-party state. So you've got very conservative people who, if they want to be in politics, have to run as Democrats. And that is who the IPAC, the Democratic establishment, and humiliatingly, Hillary Clinton is trying to get into Congress over a progressive black incumbent. And that's, I think, what's so shocking here is generally an incumbent Democrat can rely upon the support of their party. I am not the hugest fan of Jamal Bowman, but there are many, 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 many worse representatives in Congress that get the unthinking support of their parties year after year after year. So really what's happening to Jamal Bowman is pretty outrageous. This past Saturday in the Bronx, Bernie Sanders, AOC, and a wide array of non-household names Democratic politicians did a rally for Jamal Bowman, and it was frankly fascinating. I'd never seen AOC in person before. I'd seen Bernie speak in person at least once, maybe a couple times. I was out at the Democratic primary in Iowa right before COVID in 2020 and got to see Sanders a few times. I'd never seen AOC speak before, and it just sort of revealed a dimension to her political appeal that I had not been aware of. For those who may not be aware, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was at one point the youngest person in Congress, I believe.
Well, still compared to a lot of the other ones, she's very young, 34?
Yeah, she's 34, was elected, probably 6 years ago at this point, for the first time. So in her 20s, famously worked as a bartender. It's interesting. I mean, she does appear to have come up from real poverty, worked as a bartender, but she's also got a fairly elite educational profile. It allows her to cross a lot of interesting lines. But she is loathed by Republicans. She's sort of a hate figure. She is.
I know, like on Fox, she seems to be like the generic punching bag.
Yes, she's probably the second or third biggest, or maybe fourth most known Democratic figure in American politics, even though she is a lowly representative and not too senior one at that. But watching her speak, I got a really solid sense of why she's such a powerful politician and why she's likely to be around for a while and is likely to find herself in positions of more and more power. She's just very good at this. I was sitting at this rally with a couple friends. It was incredibly hot. It was a poorly attended rally. Though I suppose by the standards of rallies for primary challenges for a seat in the House of Representatives, it was pretty good. But it was a viciously hot day in New York, and I was listening to some other New York Democratic representative or union head sort of drone on, and it was like, are we really going to sit around and wait for Bernie and AOC to come on? We've done our part. Maybe we can just sort of peel off. And then the music came up, and it was like, we used to call it WWF.
WWE.
Yes, I guess it was like a professional wrestling vibe. And it really went from school board argument over the budget to professional wrestling. And, she's shouting people out and this, that, and the other thing, and has a solid narrative to her speech and is energetic and excited. And it was really interesting because she was followed by Jamal Bowman, who sort of was trying to do that. And actually, as a rather large, rather fit gentleman who looks like he could be a professional wrestler, he did a much worse job of it than AOC did, frankly. So AOC is a pretty impressive individual. That was my main takeaway.
What was the topic she was talking about?
What was happening. She talked about Gaza, called what was happening in Gaza genocide. She talked about wanting a ceasefire. But there was also just the sort of outrage of Jamal Bowman's district is interesting because it is Westchester County, which is some of the wealthier towns in the United States, and the Bronx, which is
not.
Yes, it is a famously deprived borough of New York City. across Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, you have large-scale gentrification. These places over the past couple decades have become sort of playgrounds for the rich. The Bronx is emphatically not that. It is primarily African-American, Latino, Puerto Rican, what have you. And there's a high degree of resentment for a bunch of national money to come pouring in here to try and get rid of Jamal Bowman, which I think is an entirely rational resentment. I mean, Bowman he's nowhere near as clownish as other people in the House of Representatives, but he's not like a really standout guy. He's probably, there's 6 or 7 people in the squad, and he'd probably be my 7th most favorite, or maybe 8th. But the fact that this Wall Street and IPAC money is pouring in to try to get rid of him was the core of the message, and that was the core of Bernie's message as well. So there was 2 takeaways from this. We're taking away from the main topic of today's podcast. But it was, AOC is impressive, and I think anybody who researches her at all is aware of that, and we should expect more and bigger things from her in the coming years. And also just, man, like, I really, as I fall away from my historic libertarianism and even conservatism, I've tried to avoid this sort of establishment left punching that we have. But man, it was such a irritating illustration of how bad the left is in the United States, just how stupid. So you have Bernie Sanders, the most exciting left-wing figure in U.S. politics since Eugene Debs or FDR, and you had AOC, his, pretty much anointed successor, a woman of color, talking about saving representation for the poor and the Palestinians in the U.S. Congress. And this rally, Rory, was being counter-protested by a bunch of pro-Palestine people.
Okay.
Because they felt that, I don't know, I guess AOC and Bernie, didn't say genocide early enough, or they didn't set themselves on fire in the House, in the U.S. Capitol building, so they're not good enough. They're not strong enough in their support for Palestine. And it was just, I don't know, maybe that makes sense to some people, but it sure didn't make sense to me. And I think, I didn't do a detailed head count, but there were at least a third as many people that were at the rally on a hill up outside of the security cordon of the rally trying to drown out AOC and Bernie Sanders. And I thought it was idiotic. And I went to a protest in Washington, D.C. For Palestine a number of weeks back that was, I think, a lot more impressive than most of the New York protests I've gone to, because they actually had some message discipline. They actually said things, they avoided seeming scary and stupid. But wow,
What's happened to the university protests in America? Because I've seen that ones in the likes of Oxford and stuff in England, they're very disciplined and do their best to be, not to engage in any violence. And anytime they're engage in any conversation, they bring it back to Palestine, just very professional. They also audition people. It's like, sorry, you're not good enough to be part of this protest. Like, they really don't want anyone putting a foot wrong, essentially.
Huh. Interesting. I'm not sure. I mean, that seems a little bit too much to me, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think that's what happens when universities don't have their own police, which is a very strange thing.
I think you need professionals with good message discipline leading protests.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you need to bar people from protests who don't have that. But what happened to the protests in the United States is actually very simple, Rory, and made it ridiculous that we were spending so much time talking about them, is the school year ended.
Oh.
All of those, all of the folks at elite universities who were protesting for Palestine are now working in internships at Goldman Sachs and McKinsey and other elite organizations for the summer, where they are probably learning that political advocacy is not the best choice for them going forward.
Well, it's not definitely good for employment.
No.
But where might they find employment? Would it be in the military-industrial complex?
Well, there is that, Rory, and thank you for bringing us back to the topic that I had meant to be talking about this entire time. This is something that I think more and more people are talking about, but I don't think people are really diagnosing the problems behind it. We are realizing this year in really stark ways that the United States is really bad at war. Like, we're not good at it.
So I will caveat that. So I was looking up the last time it's like America, when it does a proper war, it is unbelievable. So the last time America declared war would be World War II. So since then, it's always been, military engagements. It's like technically they're just sort of getting, their foreign policies getting a bit too frisky. You know, they just sort of send people, violence happens, and then eventually they leave. Like, it's not, war. Like when you see how America was fighting Japan and on the seas with the Navy, it's just outstanding. And the fact that the way they're able to churn out Liberty ships, like they were able to build one in under a week. Like, when America really gets its mind to it, it is terrifying and will win. But what it's currently doing, I don't know what is it?
Well, I think, Rory, that's what a lot of people, including myself, as anti-interventionist a person as I am, had sort of told myself after these serial humiliations in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, just like, well, this isn't actually, none of these wars are actually serious. We've got these restrictive rules of engagement where it's mission creep. We don't know real commitment. Obviously, the United States is still a really intimidating military force for things that it actually wants to do. But I think, as we've seen, and I don't disagree that potentially the United States could be that kind of force again. What we've seen over the past 2 years and the past 8 months especially is the United States getting humiliated in two of the kinds of conflicts that aren't, outside of the mission, aren't, strange, neocon fantasies that nobody's really committed to. The United States military is failing to defend the sea lanes in Yemen and is failing to provide basic military equipment to a proxy military, the Ukrainians against Russia. And that's like, throughout the serial humiliations of the war on terror, I could at least, Americans could at least console themselves with, well, at least the United States is good at making weapons. Turns out we're really not. At least the United States is good at, great power competition or policing the sea lanes. And Yemen is demonstrating that we're not very good at those things either. So what we're seeing is a true, or at least it's a crisis that's been ongoing for a while, but the true revealing of a cataclysmically failing U.S. military-industrial complex. And I've always complained about the military-industrial complex, but I did not realize how bad it was at its actual jobs until looking at these Ukrainian and Yemeni campaigns in tandem.
Was there any particular smoking guns that made you think, like, this is sort of just outside of the norm? Like, what was it that made you think America really has a problem here?
So the two issues are with the really glaring one in Ukraine is artillery. And I think most listeners will be, to More Freedom Foundation, will be familiar with the dimensions of this problem at this point. The Russian economy is something like a 20th the size of the United States and the EU put together. Yet, in a recent study, this is from Bain & Company, which is, I think, a consultancy of some sort, but was taken fairly seriously. Over the course of 2024, Russia is likely to produce 4.5 million artillery shells, and the United States and our allies are going to produce 1.5 million artillery shells. And, of course, the United States also is shipping a ton of artillery to Israel at this point. And what we've learned about modern war has been, fairly striking over the past couple of years. A lot of Russia, its initial attack on Ukraine, used a lot of the similar tools that the United States likes to use, or what few examples they had of it, were quickly humiliated. Failed to attain air superiority, lost a lot of special forces guys in Stasi helicopters and new pieces of equipment, that sort of thing. Then the story became about drones, and actually 2 years in, or really as recently as, as long ago as a year and a half ago, it became clear that, yes, drones are important. We are seeing real innovation here. But what was disturbingly clear is that, in truth, when you have real armies going up against each other, which isn't something that we've seen in any U.S. conflict.
Definitely in this sense where we're having like a proper front line that is, staying there for months.
What matters is the same thing that mattered from 1914 to 1918. It is the volume of production of artillery shells.
Yes.
And the U.S. military-industrial, we've known this at least for a year and a half, and the U.S. military-industrial complex is failing Ukraine to an extreme degree.
So to put an idea around the artillery, it seems that about 80% on both sides of deaths are artillery. Like, I've said it before, but this is very much the sort of spear of an ancient warfare. Now, you can argue that these other technologies could help you break that and, rout them from behind. But if America had just says, look, forget all the fancy toys, let's just make artillery, Ukraine could have just slowly but surely just, walked forward with its spears and, eventually beat Russia. Like, Russia is outstanding with artillery. I've heard talks of British soldiers when they were in foxholes and stuff saying, like, yes, these sort of regions that got incorporated, they were dreadful. But once the proper Russian army is, has you in its sights, it will hit you. So if it had have just focused intensely on artillery production, it's possible it could have broken Russia by now. Now, the argument with it is it has, a quarter the artillery of Russia, and a lot of the Russian artillery is of lower quality. So if you don't make it, you might as well, or if you've made it badly, you may well not have made it. And the Western stuff tends to be more accurate, but Ukraine did have a situation that's only recently been plugged where they were like just slowly firing half what they need. But essentially, if you're not firing, they're advancing, and vice versa. And if you're able to advance more, or if you're able to attack more, then you can advance. So the fact that they couldn't fire what they were, which is roughly 5,000 a day, while Russia fires about 20,000, it then meant that they could creep forward.
Thanks. That's the vital figure that I didn't research, and I'm grateful to you for researching. It's we're at a point where, and we have been, perhaps it's changed a little bit with the new funding from the United States. But the thing is, I'm not entirely certain it has, because our military-industrial complex is so crap that it's not actually, even after knowing this for a year and a half, they're not really ramping stuff up. But on a given day, Ukraine can fire 4,000 shells, and that's it. And the Russians are firing 20,000 shells. We much ballyhooed. We have emptied out our arsenals of a wide variety of weapons that are going to turn the tide. Our M1 Abrams tanks, which, seemed very impressive until we found out that our $10 million tanks were getting destroyed by $500 Russian drones.
I think that definitely, the Abrams is a great tank, and quite often the footage you're seeing are tanks that have maybe got stuck. The big thing about the Abrams is it keeps its crew alive, which is a very important thing, which the Russian tanks tend to do not so well.
Tend to not.
Yes.
Great. So we don't have tanks that can are actually useful warfighting machines, but at least the people in the Abrams, I don't want to minimize that. That's a good deal. Deal.
They're still good, but it's very complicated.
That's a good deal. But I understand there's this incredible investment in the sort of OSINT community, and like, HIMARS are amazing, and ATACMS are amazing, and the tanks, and if Ukraine could only have F-16s, and those are either, disappointing or happen in minor things. What really matters is artillery rounds. We've known this for a year and a half now, and we're simply not producing them. And that is humiliating.
So it would be incredible if America had from the beginning ignored a lot of this other stuff and just went, we're giving you bullets and artillery, and whatever the Russians, if they're firing 20,000 a day, you'll fire 20,000. So now the Russians are less accurate, their equipment, and it tends to have a higher failure rate. So they could be roughly at about the same, but yeah, once you start to diminish, then Russia can really advance with their expertise. But yeah, they have nearly sacrificed everything just to keep this production up.
And we wouldn't have to sacrifice anything to produce an appropriate amount of artillery shells. But that's simply not the way that our military-industrial
Because I think the
complex is
main
organized.
issue is a lot of the understanding of artillery is known. There isn't too many breakthroughs. There aren't, some great Silicon Valley guys that we can throw a couple of billion at. Like, it's a known technology. Yes, there are some better ones. There are more accurate ones, or ones that can lay mines as you fire them. But for the most part, it would just be a lot of working class people in factories getting work.
Oh, it's been a while since I've read a detailed rundown, but my understanding is that there's like one plant in Scranton, Pennsylvania that actually makes these things.
Wow.
Which means that we make things at higher cost. There's no competition. This is the key problem with the military-industrial complex.
They're roughly 4,000 each. I think Russia can make theirs for about like 1,000, but,
exactly.
As I kept getting told, this is confidential information.
Well, that's from the Bain and Company report, which is that, and then, so it's just an estimate. We don't know exactly. But the Bain and Company estimate is that, yes, every artillery shell costs the United States $4,000 and costs Russia $1,000. And that, too, is just an example of there simply isn't competition. As we'll get to, the United States government actually intentionally ended competition in the military-industrial complex about 30 years ago, which was a tremendous mistake.
Back to those Liberty ships in World War II. So that was like a generic British template from like 50 years earlier. That was just seen as the generic transport carrier. It was big, it was ugly, but it could be made quickly. And factories would compete to see who could make them quicker. But as you say, there was no competition here.
No, there is no competition in the military-industrial complex in any meaningful sense. And that's the problem here. The thing is, we actually already have a solution to that, as we will get to by the end of this trip. But let's shift over to Yemen, which is also worth talking about.
So basically, this is now the Navy get a little bit of bonus money, from what I can tell. So they tend to get left out of these things. So now they get to shoot a lot of missiles out of the sky and protect the shipping lanes of the world.
Oh, I don't think the Navy gets let out of anything, ever. That's one of the great pathologies of the U.S. military-industrial complex and the U.S. military, is that no matter what the missions are, no matter what, and I don't think there is any, one of the great problems, Rory, is that there's never been any serious thought about, these are the challenges, let's allocate the money appropriately to do that. We're going to spend 20 years in the Middle East. Obviously, we should funnel most of our money towards the army. And of course, you could go too far in that direction, but we don't go in that direction at all. If you look at every Pentagon budget, it is in lockstep. The Air Force, the Army, and the Navy get very similar amounts of money every time. You do, with no recognition of, say, how good these military branches are at spending that money, because we never audit the Pentagon. No sense of what are the ongoing conflicts? No, so the Navy has always gotten as much money as the Army and as much money as the Air Force, and we are learning now, has used it incredibly poorly.
Okay, because I could see this as a training exercise. This is sort of invaluable because there's only so much training you can do. While this is, things can go wrong and they'll be throwing strange tactics at you. So I'm sure there's a massive amount of data the U.S. Navy will be gathering from this.
Well, there's a massive amount of data that the U.S. Navy is gathering from this, and there's a massive amount that China is gathering from this. What is really underemphasized is that I think a lot of excuses are being made for our failure in Yemen, saying like, these are just sort of insurgents, and this is just a kind of war on terror type fight like Iraq or Afghanistan. No, it's not. This is actually exactly the fight that we would fight against Iran or China. A war with China would be about defending Taiwan off the coast of China. So it would be U.S. Navy ships versus ground-based missile and drone technologies. And the U.S. Navy is being absolutely humiliated. All the data that they're collecting is also being collected by the Chinese in
Djibouti.
Djibouti, exactly. Well, the only fully acknowledged and operational foreign Chinese military base is in Djibouti on the Red Sea, recording all kinds of information. And so what really I've been predicting and expecting a U.S. failure here, but the scale of U.S. failure. I thought that, we were going to kill, hundreds of thousands of Yemenis, and this was going to be awful. And to be clear, there is some restraint on the part of the Biden administration that may be making this job a little more difficult. But I don't, the Saudi Arabians had no restraint, mercilessly attacked
definitely no.
The Houthis for 8 years, and that did nothing. So yeah, no question we could be killing a lot more Yemenis, but I don't think we'd actually be any better at stopping this Houthi threat to shipping.
Well, the other basic thing, a lot of you're able to intercept where it came from, so you could always argue that we're just blowing up wherever the rocket came from, which is probably in the some sort of military zone. So you can always justify that, but obviously they're unable to do that.
Yeah, and I don't think the Houthis are firing that many missiles from population areas yet. But if we really intensify things, then yeah, they'd probably start, because the Houthis don't care too much about
quite ruthless
the Yemeni people. Yeah. But what really sort of emphasized how badly we're doing here is a recent Wall Street Journal article. The admission by the U.S. Navy, actually by someone at CENTCOM, I think, saying that we had spent, over the past 7 months, $1 billion.
Wow.
$1 billion to carry out, but you think that's bad. People who focus on that, okay, we spent $1 billion to lose the Houthis, that's terrible. What's gobsmacking is the rest of this sentence that people are not paying enough attention to, which is we've spent $1 billion to carry out 450 strikes and intercept 200 drones and missiles.
Cost to interception ratio, like the cost of those drones and stuff must be very little. 20,000 I've heard rumored.
So that's like $2 million to stop each individual drone or missile.
Which, roughly 20,000, but a lot of them could be a lot less.
Yeah, so in the context of a conflict, I mean, let's not even talk about China. In the context of a conflict with Iran, say we're trying, the U.S. Navy is trying to carry out operations in the Strait of Hormuz, allowing Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait to get some oil out. Our U.S. Navy vehicles will be doing that. That's all. The Strait of Hormuz is off the Iranian coast. 450 strikes, 200 drones and missiles, like, we'd be doing that not in 7 months, we'd be doing that in an afternoon. And in the context of China, 450 strikes, 200 drones and missiles, we'd be doing that in 10 minutes.
It'll be hard to comprehend if that ever did kick off.
So you're talking about like $1 trillion days, like and this is laughable.
Oh yeah.
And the United States has incredible financial resources, and we could probably sustain a $1 trillion a day war against China for, I don't know, a month or something like that. But Jesus, like, and it's absurd, especially when you consider that the Houthis are fighting us for, we spent $1 billion. The Houthis, to do all this, might have spent, I don't know, $10 million?
Yeah, significantly less.
Like 1,000 as much. And the differentials between what the United States is paying and what China is paying in a potential war over Taiwan are similarly insane. And this is not something that has to be the case. The United States, it's not written somewhere that the United States has to be incapable of producing munitions in a cost-effective manner.
Mm-hmm.
This is a conscious choice made by the U.S. government and the U.S. military. By design. And I think it's that design that has been proven over the past 2 years in these two supposedly vitally important theaters of war to be utterly failed.
Just to give a context, 1 billion could apparently build 22 U.S. high schools if they were, 45 million to build one high school?
It's and those costs are absurdly inflated as well. So it's a disease that stretches across the U.S. economy. One of
is this one of those things that if America was in a proper war again, that instantly these shackles would be thrown off and it would be much more efficient and a lot more competition?
Well, you'd think so, but theoretically, the war in Ukraine is something that's real and that we care about.
Yeah.
Theoretically, keeping the sea lanes clear is real war that we actually care about. And I think that's also one of the most shocking things about the past 2 years is that it underlines that, no, actually, Washington, D.C. doesn't take any of this seriously. Like in the context of, say, like we've got like Chinese legions marching up from Mexico or something like that, then yes, immediately, probably the head of every defense prime would be shot. And then we would, then the next guys could come in and actually make weapons for something like what weapons cost. The United States is never going to be in that situation, or at least not in our lifetimes. Yes, absolutely. If the United States were threatened to the degree that we thought we were threatened during World War II, then yes, we would be able to make things for cheaper. But I think one of the most important things about our failure in Yemen and Ukraine, and the fact that really nothing is being done about it, indicates that actually nobody in Washington, D.C. is at all serious about talking about these threats, which, I mean, kind of chimes what I've been saying. This is all sort of theater. Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel are utterly meaningless to U.S. security. They're just excuses to keep this obscene theft from the U.S. taxpayer going. Yet none of this needs to be anywhere near this expensive.
Are there any American politicians bringing this up, or is it just sort of, more money for the troops?
Well, what's interesting is that politicians often bring this up. John McCain, who was a huge hawk, loved to talk about this sort of thing. It's a bipartisan thing to mention,
and not do anything.
We mention it, and we're concerned about this. And we'll let the experts come back with a blue ribbon report. And what the experts at the Pentagon and all the Pentagon think tanks, and which are also defense industry think tanks, have come back and said, yes, you're right. You identified a really clear problem. And what we need to do is give us a bigger defense budget. If we had a $2 trillion defense budget, we'd be able to do all these things, we promise. The problem is you're only giving us $1 trillion every year, and that's just not enough to seriously compete. So there's a real lack of willingness to do the real structural changes. So I would assert that we could have a dramatically better military that did a dramatically better job providing all of the weapon systems we could imagine for like half the cost, for sure. That is absolutely doable. So the problem is, I watched an interesting YouTube video by, I guess his name was Ryan Macbeth or something like that.
Yes, he terrifies me, but he is also he's a brilliant military expert, but he is, whatever Uncle Sam tells him to do, he does.
Yes, he is not he may be a decent analyst, but he is not a particularly serious analyst of the U.S. military-industrial complex, because, of course, he's part of it.
I think it was he has he trained to be able to counter tanks. He was a tank man and stuff in the army and has worked his way up, and I think he's now cybersecurity expert, and seems to have a AI business, which is exactly what the U.S. military wants right now.
Yeah, no. So he is a U.S. military contractor, a member of the defense industry, military-industrial complex, and he recently ran a video saying, actually, the military-industrial complex doesn't exist, which is pretty rich. But one of his real historical events that he focused on and misinterpreted massively is an event that happened in 1993 called it is colloquially known as the Last Supper. So the Last Supper this is in the aftermath of the end of the Cold War. This is the new Clinton administration, and this is Les Aspin, I believe was the defense secretary at that point. Don't quote me on that. I think that's the case. Sits down with the 50-odd or maybe 100-odd major contractors at a dinner in Washington, D.C. and says, look, you guys are going to have to consolidate because we can't afford your stuff anymore. We simply can't maintain 50 big defense contractors anymore in the post-Cold War environment. And I guess I can see why they did this, but wow, was it an incredible misstep. What should have happened is we should have continued to apply the appropriate antitrust or competition law to these entities and let the ones that were good at providing weaponry survive and the ones that were bad at it die. That's what should have happened. That's what nominally would happen.
That's sort of how capitalism's supposed to work. companies die and then other ones flourish?
Instead, we opted, I guess in the name of preserving capacity, which absolutely did not happen. You could look at the fact that we have one plant churning out artillery shells. In the name of preserving capacity, I guess, we embarked on this program of war socialism, which was essentially said, instead of letting, some of these companies succeed or fail, and maybe we'll end up with 25 defense companies, we sort of took off any kind of antitrust scrutiny because for national security, and allowed these 50 companies to become 5 enormous, utterly useless companies. These companies specialize in really government affairs, government relations. They specialize in lobbying. They specialize in creating incredibly complex weapons systems that can be built in as many places as possible. They do not specialize in war. They do not specialize in efficiently providing large amounts of military equipment. The one thing that we've learned from the past, whether we're talking about Armenia and Azerbaijan, whether we're talking about Ukraine and Russia, certainly, the main thing that we've learned from warfare this decade is that more is more. And what, you need more artillery shells, you need more drones, you need more cheaper missiles. And what these defense contractors, RTX Technologies, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, General Dynamics, is that still one of them, or has it gotten eaten? These monstrosities excel in providing crappy short-run pieces of equipment that look really impressive, that sound really exciting.
Well, there's one that springs to mind. Have you ever heard of the Switchblade? The Switchblade is what's called a loitering munition, which is like a drone that basically will fly around in a circle, and if it sees a tank, it'll then go for that and try to kill it. But so these retail it at what, 60,000-ish? And this is the greatest thing ever, but it can only carry a very small explosive, roughly about a shotgun shell. But what you see in Ukraine is they've basically made beefed up remote control planes that have, it's crazy when you see them making them. They'll saw open like a cluster bomb, like Soviet Union cluster bomb, take it apart, and then take out the little tiny explosives and then attach that to the plane. But this remote control plane just has, that little children's toy where you have like a little, it's like an electric circle around an electric wire. And if you touch the sides, it buzzes. They essentially have that at the front. So when it crashes, the little 2 wires will touch and it'll cause it to explode. These must cost less than $1,000 to make. And they're just making loads of them. And that's what you'll see a lot of these drone footage from Ukraine is. They're not using switchblades.
And the United States still has a manufacturing capacity.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, obviously, China has gotten better at a lot of these things than we are. But the United States has enough educated, intelligent people, enough money, enough facilities that could produce those actually, decent, cheap munitions at incredible scale.
Oh, yeah. You could build a professional version of that.
Yeah, at incredible scale.
Because you can see Ukraine has created their own sort of helicopter drone that's essentially got 8 blades. It goes out the side, so if one gets shot off, it can still fly. But it looks very DIY, but they're just ordering. I get the feeling somebody in Poland is ordering a vast amount from AliExpress, and China's like, yeah, that's fine. You Polish man that wants to buy 100,000 motors, work away. So, the Ukraine military-industrial complex is doing that because it has to.
So there's no reason that the United States can't mass-produce missiles, mass-produce artillery shells, we have all of the relevant skills. We invented most of these things. We could put our innovation brains, towards actually building cheaper and more efficient stuff. Unfortunately, we have 5 or 6 companies that are geared towards building crap like the F-35. I know there's a dozen, 100 people who just heard that who said, "What are you talking about? The F-35 totally flies now."
Well, I think it is
totally.
I think it is good, but what you and I can disagree on, for every F-35, there's probably 1,000 projects that went nowhere that may have cost half as much. Like, I feel like if America, when its mainline thing is always incredible, its main tank, its main gun, its main aircraft, but there's so much fluff around the sides.
So Northrop Grumman had a working prototype of a drone fighter 20 years ago. If we'd put 1/10 of the amount of money we put into the F-35 into the drone fighter, we would have mass-produced drone fighter capabilities, like thousands upon thousands. instead of the F-35, where, the United States is going to end up having max 1,000 F-35s that'll all get wiped out in the first 15 minutes of a war with China, whereas we could have had 1 million drone fighter jets if we had actually, devoted our money appropriately. But that's the kind of crap. So the F-35, yes, it flies now. It's been able to successfully deliver munitions on a few occasions. I have zero confidence as to what that means in a real war. But okay, the F-35 flies. Okay, what about the literal combat ship, the LCS?
Oh, yes.
Which was...
It didn't go quite as well.
where the Navy put a ton of money, tens of billions of dollars, or was it hundreds of billions of dollars over decades? They made 3, and now they're decommissioning them because they barely float. That's the kind of thing that our 5 crappy defense industry folks, companies want to make and still want to make. And for all of the talk about how serious everything is now, if we were serious about Ukraine, the defense primes would be competing to build for the rapid build out of artillery assembly lines.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this is something that wouldn't be that hard to do. Would cost, and that's the problem. It wouldn't be that hard to do. You could do this for $10 to $100 million, a few hundreds of millions of dollars, and then you'd be producing something that is only $4,000 per unit, or hopefully it would be dramatically cheaper, $2,000 per unit. And that's just not what our modern military-industrial complex wants to do. So the problem is a monopoly
But you
problem.
need a space force, Rob. You need a space force.
Well, that brings me to a solution. So I think it's easy for me to say things that sound kind of crazy, like, oh, we could have a infinitely better force for half the cost, to sort of mock all these people who people are looking at this problem. The Pentagon is looking at this problem, and what they're saying is, as I said, oh, you need to give us twice as much money. Actually, and it would be easy to listen to them if we didn't have a phenomenal, already implemented example of how we just need a little competition and we just need new companies. And that is the United States space industry. I think, unfortunately, Elon Musk has turned himself into a bit of a hate figure among people who went to college. People haven't been talking about this, but Tesla is an impressive company and has made a lot of money. SpaceX is one of the most impressive business stories is actually probably the most impressive business story of the century.
Okay.
And it is exactly, somebody needs to write this or make this video. It would take more reason. It would take me 6 months to do this. SpaceX has proven, and it frustrates me that people don't, not only that the entire United States defense procurement industry is a joke, SpaceX has proven they can easily be done infinitely better with tremendous innovation, tremendous volume, at a fraction of the cost.
But also, yeah, well, you'd include the likes of Blue Origin and stuff, because you're saying they're competing with each other to get better contracts.
I wouldn't really, because Blue Origin isn't really a factor. Okay, so in 2023, the United States carried out 104 successful rocket launches. 96 of them were SpaceX. That's 96 out of 104. SpaceX revolutionized the space industry, but what's even more exciting is the way that they did it. Most Pentagon contracts and most NASA contracts before SpaceX were provided on a cost-plus basis. This is how you have nightmares like the F-35. This is what you gave us plans. This is what you want to build. We're going to keep funding you until you build it, no matter what. And that is how you get the F-35 program. That's how you get the literal combat ship. In 2006, through the COTS program, Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, I think I was listening to an Odd Lots podcast, which was very worth listening to on this topic, SpaceX and Elon Musk. And this guy was saying, actually, we really shouldn't be crediting Elon Musk. We should probably be crediting a Bush administration appointee in 2006 who made the decision to actually, for once, this is a Republican, this is very rare actually, a Republican that actually tried to introduce real competition into government procurement. And the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services contract was essentially said, here's a set amount of money to these companies, and could you develop a new kind of space opportunity? So, and because up until SpaceX, was it 4 or 5 years back, started bringing astronauts up to the International Space Station, the United States was dependent on Russia to get people into space.
But that is an incredible rocket, and I think it's the safest rocket in human history.
What, SpaceX?
The Soyuz, the Russian rocket. Like, it was incredible. Or it is incredible.
It was incredible, and their industry has also been completely destroyed by Elon Musk. It's interesting because a lot of people, Elon Musk had some controversy over whether or not he was going to allow Ukraine to use Starlink or something like that, or the extent to which, and everyone's like, oh man, Elon Musk should be instantly punished. And that was because people just did not realize how much value SpaceX has provided to the U.S. military-industrial complex. Like, sure, yeah, like New York Times columnists can say that, but everybody working for the Air Force, NASA, Space Force, anybody in the U.S. government who actually wants to do actual airlift, like, this has been revolutionized. So basically, in 15 years, Elon Musk did a number of things that were supposed to be impossible, the reusable rockets, and is launching stuff for fractions of the cost. And what's kind of crazy is that his main competitor to do that is 2 of the 5 defense primes that we were just talking about. The competition, so basically he had to sue the Air Force to get them to start considering his rockets. And the case, I think, ended up getting thrown out, but his argument was so basic and so simple, which was essentially, hey, I have a rocket that actually flies places, that can actually carry out what you guys want today. Lockheed Martin and Boeing don't offer that. The Falcon 9 has been flying for, I don't know, a decade now. The United Launch Alliance, Lockheed Martin and Boeing, finally managed to do one launch of their competitor to the Falcon 9 after 12 years of development and billions upon billions of dollars from NASA. I would point people towards this recent Odd Lots podcast on SpaceX because it's truly stunning, and it illustrates just how many rings SpaceX has run around our traditional space launch industry. The key point here is to say that NASA's budget has not moved since 1990. Yet since 1990, the U.S. space industry has been revolutionized. The amount of satellites that we have in the air, the capabilities that we have, the ability to get back to the moon for a fraction of the price of, like, this is all because they introduced just a little bit of competition into, and arguably you've created now a new monster with SpaceX. So it's really important that Blue Origin,
so it can become the next Boeing.
Yes, exactly. So it's very important that other companies continue to be funded. I think NASA, because it doesn't have the sort of guaranteed U.S. goes out and creates wars for the Pentagon thing that, actually has to be somewhat cost conscious. And I think they are facilitating the rise of other SpaceX-like companies.
Well, also, so the Pentagon has put, $5.6 billion into SpaceX, Blue Origin, and United Launch Alliance. So we are seeing competition there between them. I'd be more of a fan of Blue Origin. I think Bezos is just putting in his own cash, so we hear less hype about it. But it should be good. Should be interesting.
I'm kind of used to be much more of a rocket nerd. And though I don't have the figures in front of me, that's not actually a competition. The fact that the United Launch Alliance is still included in those programs is, as you said, it's a desperate attempt to maintain competition. And Blue Origin hasn't really demonstrated the capacity to go much further than, I think they're supposedly in the next couple of years going to get to the point where Elon Musk was in 2008. So like it's not real competition.
Did they put William Shatner in space?
They did. They put William Shatner in space, but not really. What's that?
SpaceX didn't.
So, like, there's
I know.
The Blue Origin rocket gets up to, like, the edge of space where William Shatner can be like, oh, wow, look at the stars. The SpaceX Falcon rockets have been regularly servicing the International Space Station, which is much, much higher up, for years now. So Yeah, the United Launch Alliance, Boeing and Lockheed Martin have been utterly humiliated by SpaceX.
Boeing's also just been humiliated by their own planes as well.
Yes, there's been a lot of that. So it's. I guess I get guff sometimes for talking about problems and not solutions. Like, this is eminently solvable. We have a SpaceX, and we know, because the Russians are doing it, that you can produce artillery. Yeah, okay, sure, labor's cheaper in Russia or whatever, but we also have expertise in automation here. Like, we can figure out how to produce all these things for dramatically less money, and also innovate at the same time, because it already happened in aerospace, which isn't that different in industry and actually features the same incumbent players. So the U.S. military is currently incapable, the U.S. military-industrial complex is currently incapable of fighting serious wars. But we not only know how to solve this, we've already solved this in a similar arena. So
capitalism should capital and have competition and be allowed to die. Seems to be the best way to help the American military.
Indeed.
So we hope you'll join us next time. All the best. The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire: What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.